We're going to address the consequences of a world that does not accept and embrace God's vision for married love and life. And we're going to hear from a physician, a psychologist, and a lawyer. And our first speaker is Dr. Bill Williams. He's a physician scientist trained in rheumatology and immunology, and is currently serving as president and CEO of Bria Cell Therapeutics Corporation. Following his conversion to the faith in 1997, Dr. Williams became involved with the Philadelphia Guild of the Catholic Medical Association, and he also served as the editor of the Linacre Quarterly. He was ordained a deacon in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia in 2013. Dr. Bill.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to be talking about medical aspects of contraception. And one of the things that I think is good to focus on, we've talked a lot about how Blessed Pope Paul VI was prophetic. But how did he know is one of the questions. Well, Catholic theology teaches that we're a profound unity of soul and body. So empirically, as a scientist, this gives me a hypothesis you can test. Whatever affects the soul should affect the body, and vice versa. Therefore, if that's true, spiritual sicknesses, sins, and spiritual health, also known as virtues, should have physical, psychological, and sociological consequences. And I love this quote recently from Christian Brugger: "Evil acts are bad for us even when we choose them in good faith." How does this apply to contraception? Well, I think it applies in multiple ways. Here's a table from a paper published by Richard Ferring in the Linacre Quarterly, looking at the odds ratio of divorce and separation in the 2010 National Study of Family Growth. And you can see that if you're on the pill, you have a higher rate of divorce. If you are using a condom, you have a higher rate of divorce. But if you're using NFP, lower rate of divorce. So here's a sociological fact right there, and we don't have to go into all the statistics about how two parents staying married is the best situation to raise a child. We know all this. These are huge sociological consequences. Here's some medical things that have been going on. Also, I mean, you can see the divorces on the left here. Once the pill was legalized and came out in 1960s, divorce rates shot up and then stabilized. Now, if you look at sexually transmitted disease rates, with the advent of antibiotics, these nosedived and then stabilized. But then, when the pill came out, boom, up goes gonorrhea. Now it came down again later, but then entirely new sexually transmitted diseases began to arise, and there's many, many more that are not on this slide. This is just one example. So you can see that just with the widespread use of contraception, the increase in marital infidelity, that you have other medical consequences right away. But hormonal contraceptives compound the problem, because not only do they deny the goods of marriage, as any method of contraception would, but they also treat a normal, healthy, functioning body system as if it was a disease with potent steroid hormones. That is not a good thing to do. And I would make the case that even if you didn't oppose hormonal contraceptives, and I have another term for them I'll get to, based on moral and ethical grounds, they should be opposed on purely medical grounds. I do drug development. In drug development, you look at risk-benefit, and usually there's a risk-benefit curve that you can see that as you increase the dose of a drug, the benefit increases and then it plateaus off. And if it's a drug, there's also going to be a curve of toxicity that hopefully will happen at higher doses. Okay, that's the normal, it gives you your therapeutic window of where you've got something that's a drug. If the two curves are reversed, we call that a poison. Well, for hormonal contraceptives, there is no benefit because you're not treating any disease. So here you have pure risk. So what are these risks? What are these side effects? This is from the Yaz prescribing information. This is going to take several slides to go through the adverse reactions reported that are felt to be drug-related. Okay? Nausea, vomiting, GI symptoms, breakthrough bleeding, spotting, change in menstrual flow, amenorrhea, temporary infertility after discontinuation, edema, swelling, of the ankles and elsewhere. And there's more. Melasma, which is a skin condition. We've got breast changes, tenderness, enlargement, secretion, changes in weight or appetite, increase or decrease, change in cervical ectropia and secretion, diminution in lactation if it's given postpartum, cholestatic jaundice, that's a lot of fun, migraine. Hey, here's a pill that'll give you migraine and do you no good. Perfect. Allergic rashes, mood changes including depression, reduced tolerance to carbohydrates. Okay, so in other words, pre-diabetes, we heard already about that. Also raises blood pressure. I just don't understand it. Vaginitis, including candidiasis, change in the corneal curvature, which can cause contact lenses to no longer fit. And then therefore there's intolerance to them. Decreased serum folate levels. Okay, let's give you a cause of anemia. That's a good thing. Exacerbation of systemic lupus erythematosus. I'm a rheumatologist. These patients do not need to have their disease exacerbated. It's bad enough as it is. Exacerbation of porphyria. That's rare, but that can happen. Also chorea, a movement disorder. Aggravation of varicose veins, that's a wonderful thing. And then you can get anaphylactic reactions. Wouldn't you love to have one of those on your way to work one day? Not a good thing to have. So what about progesterone-only contraceptives? Maybe they're safer than the combined hormonal ones. Well, probably not, it turns out. And if you look at common symptoms, in fact, women are more likely to come off a progesterone-only contraceptive than a combined oral one because they're less well tolerated, mostly because of menstrual irregularities, and you can see a large number of them here. And the interesting thing is that after year one, it doesn't disappear. People who tolerate it for a year can continue to have these problems out through 5 years of this particular study. And then they have a host of other things. Now, to be honest, not all of these are drug-related. They are listed in the prescribing information. I think this is Implanon. So you can see all these, but some of them are probably not drug-related, like upper respiratory tract infections, probably a similar incidence in the control group if they had a control group. But there's a number of these that clearly are drug-related, like weight increase, acne, breast pain. There's just so many things that these things cause. And these are the common ones that are in the labels that they admit to. But of course, that's not the whole story. There's more. So there's cardiovascular risks. Clearly an increased risk, and now we're talking about the more serious things, of venous thromboembolism. This is a relative risk of 3.5, so that's a 3.5-fold increase of risk based on recent reviews. Myocardial infarction, okay, heart attacks and stroke. Increase of relative risk of 1.6, 1.7 for MI and stroke. This is not inconsequential. Increased risk of cardiovascular mortality. And this is a very, very interesting marketing ploy that they have in these prescribing informations. If you look at the way that they have this put together, you can see that it looks like the problem here is smoking. If you're an ever user of oral contraceptives and then you smoke, boy, that really increases your risk of having cardiovascular-related mortality. And for your controls, that's also true. Boy, smoking looks like it's really a bad thing to do. And so this has come out to the recommendation that smokers should not use the pill. I don't think that that's widely followed, but that is the current recommendation. But what happens if you just rearrange the columns to make it a more fair comparison? You can see that the problem really is in the use of the pill here. So if you use the pill and you're 25 to 34, your risk is going to go up. And if you're over 45, it goes up quite a bit for cardiovascular-related mortality. And if you're a smoker, it just goes up to an astronomical amount. So here are some clear risks that are kind of hidden in the way that they put the information out there. And then there's cancer risk. Now, some of this is admitted to in the prescribing information, but it's not all there, and they couch it in a way that makes it sound like overall it's probably not a big deal. But clearly there's a an increased risk of breast cancer. The World Health Organization has recognized combined oral contraceptives as group-1 carcinogens. Those are things that increase the proliferation of cells, so they're set up for mutations which can then trigger them to become cancers. So they found one meta-analysis, or we found one meta-analysis, where the risk for breast cancer, relative risk is 1.08. So that's not a very big increase, about an 8% increase. But you have to remember that in the US alone, there's 2.8 million cases of breast cancer out there prevalent in the population. The risk is much higher if this is used prior to the first full-term pregnancy. This is why it just slays me when I see things like Yaz advertising for acne for teenagers. These people are really increasing their risk for later breast cancer quite a bit. But a recent, very large cohort study, and this is in the New England Journal of Medicine just this past December, found that the relative risk was actually higher for recent users of oral contraceptives, 20% increased risk in breast cancer. And this increased with duration of use as well. So this is clearly a risk. What about other cancers? Well, this is just information from an NCI fact sheet. Dr. Raviel and I and Louise Mitchell are actually in the process of doing a comprehensive literature review of all this, which is going to be submitted to the Linacre, which, by the way, is going to have a special issue on Humanae Vitae this November coming up. But we see an increased risk in cervical cancer, particularly with increased duration of risk, up to 120% increased risk with 10 or more years of use of hormonal contraceptives. There's a decreased risk of endometrial cancer. There is a decreased risk of ovarian cancer and of colorectal cancer. The colorectal cancer is probably more of an immune mechanism, I think, as opposed to a proliferation-driven endocrine type of mechanism. So they kind of emphasize some of these decreased risks in the labeling. But if you look at the prevalence of these cancers, it's quite clear that overall, that the risk of cancer in women who use hormonal agents, hormonal contraceptives, is increased because of the high incidence of breast cancer. So these agents likely contribute to a substantial number of cancer cases in women overall. What about some of the less well-known effects, things that did not get into the labels? Well, I'm a rheumatologist. I'm very interested in autoimmune disease, and we know that estrogens are kind of pro-inflammatory. And so the female sex is associated with an increased risk of many different autoimmune diseases. So there is clearly an increased risk in the incidence of Crohn's disease. And this is from many studies, including several meta-analysis, probably around a 45 to 50% increased risk in this very serious inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease. You also have an increased risk in ulcerative colitis, another inflammatory bowel disease. And systemic lupus, there may be up to a 2.3-fold increase in risk of the development of systemic lupus in patients who use hormonal contraceptives. There's also an increased risk, probably, there aren't as many studies, in multiple sclerosis, interstitial cystitis, pemphigus, eczema, and psoriasis. There's no effect on some autoimmune diseases, and there is a decreased risk in hyperthyroidism, so we have to be honest about that. Although those studies are actually quite old now, and I haven't seen any recent studies on hyperthyroidism to confirm this, so with the low-dose pill, so to speak, since they've decreased the estrogen amounts in the pill. And there also may be a decreased risk in a very rare autoimmune disease, primary biliary cirrhosis. But overall, I think that the burden of autoimmune disease in this country and in this world is higher because of the use of the pill. And then we also have progesterone-only contraceptives. Now, there's really just one very large cohort study in the third world population, but they clearly saw an increase in arthropathies and related disorders, eczema, contact dermatitis, pruritus, and other conditions like alopecia, acne, and urticaria. Now, this is only focusing on the autoimmune diseases. There's a lot of other things that are noted to be detrimental effects with the use of progesterone-only contraceptives. And then there's also some other things that have been documented. Changes in brain structure, particularly when they're used during adolescence, have been documented. Effects on mate selection. There's decrease in libido. Here's a pill that will allow you to have more sex, but you won't want to. I don't get it. Depressive symptoms. Hey, and you can be depressed too. What a selling point. And then, of course, there's a reduction in marriage and increase in divorce, and a lot of this has been documented in some papers by Dr. Klaus, who's here, and in association with other authors in the Linacre Quarterly. What's the contrast with natural methods? So these natural methods respect the intrinsic link between the unitive and procreative aspects of the marital act and respect the dignity of the partner as a combined body-soul individual. These are associated with better communication between spouses, lower divorce rates, lack of the intrinsic health risks of hormonal contraceptives. So, I'm not sure if this is going to play. What have we done about this at the Catholic Medical Association? One of the things that we've tried to do is to get radio ads out there and available. They're on our website. You can download them and put them on your local radio station to point out some of these risks, not just for contraception, but also for abortion and same-sex marriage and other things like that. The radio ads are out there. They're very effective, and I would recommend people trying to evangelize the culture in this way and other ways. And so I have some final thoughts about that, because it's great for us to know all this information. It's great for us to be committed to the proper view of the human person. But how are we going to transform the culture? What can we do ourselves? Well, one of the things is that we live in a society of catchphrases and one-liners and obviously tweets. We all know that now. Jesus is the master of one-liners. As I have loved you, so you should also love one another. That is, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. Blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You could go on and on. I mean, the Gospels are just chock full of one-liners, so we have to follow Christ and perfect our own one-liners to win the hearts of the people. So this is what I would suggest. Here's some of my favorite one-liners. First of all, God gives us a choice between life-giving love and sterile sex. Choose wisely. Choose life. Fertility is not a disease to be treated, but a blessing to be cherished. Oral contraceptives are really sterilizing steroids, and I think we should start calling them that. Oral contraceptive is a bland term, but if we start calling things what they really are, people may wake up. And so when you talk about them, say, well, in studies of sterilizing steroids, it has a much greater impact. And they're not performance-enhancing steroids, they're performance-inhibiting. All family planning should be natural. Real men use NFP. We should love people and use things, not use people and love things. Of course, that's Bishop Fulton Sheen is one of my favorite quotes of his. Love is life-giving. Lust is sterile. True love is free, total, faithful, and fruitful, which I first heard from Christopher West. And true love holds nothing back. Please add your own. Think of them. Use them. Let's evangelize the culture and make a difference in the world. God bless you all. Thank you.